By the time he took power in 1983, Paul Keating's idea for Australia was a total Adam Smith model economy in a globalised world, where every country has its own specialisation. And Keating's stated idea for the Australian economy is that our specialisation was raw materials, and that's what we should concentrate on. To have a raw materials economy, we needed total free trade, just a complete throwback to the days and the arguments of the East India Company. Any other economy, any other industry in our economy that survived under these circumstances, well and good, but they were not to be the priority. The priority was just Australia being a quarry for a globalised world economy, which is what we have become. In 1987, Keating went on to his next area of reform, which was tariffs. This gutted Australian manufacturing, like our traditional textile, clothing and footwear industry. It gutted agriculture, traditional agricultural areas like, citrus and pork and all these areas of domestic production, which were then forced to compete with cheap imports from overseas, and just gutted whole industries in Australia. As of 1989, Keating embarked on the next phase of his reform program, which was privatisation. Major public assets in Australia began being sold off. The Commonwealth Bank was the leading one. Qantas was another major one that was sold off by the federal government, and a whole host of smaller ones.
In order to maintain the appearance of wealth, money was fed into successive bubbles while the last vestiges of Roosevelt's bank regulations were being torn down. In 1999, Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, today the director of President Obama's National Economic Council, acted on behalf of the Wall Street forces he represented under the Bill Clinton administration to push through the repeal of Glass-Steagall. These were the banking regulations established by Roosevelt, used to safeguard the savings and pensions of the people from investment bankers who used money to gamble in derivatives and other Ponzi schemes.
After a little while, they ran out of legitimate ways to fuel it. Right? The market for mortgages was saturated. So in America, you saw the rise in illegitimate avenues to feed the property bubble, namely subprime loans. It was all securitization, mortgage-backed securities. They were feeding a bubble. To them it didn't matter. And they were really clever. They thought they'd derivatized the risk component out of it. They'd sold that off sideways as a credit default swap. AIG held all these credit default swaps in London, right? And that took care of the risk component. And they thought they were on a winner. This would fuel the bubble forever. And it didn't.
Recognize, as I said before, the problem here is that we have been, it's not because of this financial investment or that financial investment or this monetary thing. It's because we have adopted policies of practice in succession, especially over the post-war period, since the time that Roosevelt died. We have adopted policies which in each case, as my own experience proves, have led predictably to a collapse of the system as it was operating then. And we have reacted again predictably to policies which led predictably to another collapse of the U.S. economy. It's not a monetary statistical thing. If you're not increasing your productivity, then attrition is taking over. If you're overestimating your income and drawing it down, you are going to have a collapse. And I can say, my authority is I have predicted these things a number of times, forecast them, and they've always happened exactly as I've said, where everybody who uses different methods has been wrong. No one matched me on 57. It was precise. No one matched me on these other crises. They were all predictable. They were all foreseeable. Not by statistics, but by understanding the physical principles of economy.
Between July and September of 2007, Lyndon LaRouche announced a three-step policy measure in principle which would provide a pathway out of financial disintegration. That policy, still today, is his Homeowners and Bank Protection Bill. The policy spread like wildfire across America as the housing bubble blew out, throwing communities into financial and social crisis, while states and local governments were facing severe budget deficits. Beginning in August of 2007, the LaRouche movement began gathering thousands of endorsements supporting the policy, from individual political and union representatives, local councils, and several state legislatures. In Australia, the policy proposal gathered similar support from local councils, with several passing resolutions supporting the policy and hundreds of individual councillors and citizens signing in support, calling for the Australian government to discuss the Homeowners and Bank Protection Bill.
In January 2008, the Citizens Electoral Council began campaigning for LaRouche's Homeowners and Bank Protection Bill for here in Australia. And there's two crucial elements of that bill. The first is the Australian banking system has to be put through effectively bankruptcy reorganisation, like a Chapter 11 bankruptcy reorganisation, as they say in the United States. The second part is that we have to put an urgent freeze on all homeowner mortgage foreclosures and family farm foreclosures to keep people in their homes. Now, these two elements of the policy of the Homeowners and Bank Protection Bill won't function by themselves. So this happens in conjunction with LaRouche's international proposal for a new Bretton Woods financial and monetary system. Now, Mr. LaRouche is calling upon the leadership of the nations of Russia, China, India and the United States to come together and make a political decision to say that this global financial and monetary system is utterly bankrupt and we need a new system. Therefore, we have to put the existing system through bankruptcy reorganisation, but we need a new system which is based upon not this crazy Keynesian monetarist garbage we've had for the last 60 years, but upon the principles of national banking and credit creation as Franklin Roosevelt initially prescribed back in 1944, before it was derailed by the Keynesians. Now, under this new Bretton Woods proposal, it's centred around national banking and credit creation. You have perfectly sovereign nation states that then can create the credit they need for their own internal development. And because you have currencies that are then sovereign and nations that are sovereign, you can establish treaty arrangements between countries to determine exchange rate values of various currencies. And then you can have real economic development over the long term, because countries aren't being looted like they were in the 80s, in particular 80s and 90s, through massive currency devaluations from the floating exchange rate system. What's required in Australia is for the government to create a federal agency to place our Australian banks under protection, whilst at the same time freezing all mortgages for homeowners and family farmers. This is to adjust the value of those mortgages back to something that is reasonable, given that we've been in a real estate bubble for many years, and also to adjust interest rates back to something that's actually reasonable. We also have to look at the huge amount of speculative debt in the banking system. This $14.2 trillion of derivatives, over-the-counter derivatives and other toxic debt in our banking system has to be written off. So that has to be done as well. Whilst this is going on, we have to stop foreclosures on owner-occupied homes, family homes and family farms. Currently, JP Morgan Fujitsu is forecasting 7.5% unemployment. Now, we know that it's going to go much, much higher than this, but under their figures, they are saying that 1.2 million householders will be in mortgage stress by December this year, and also 30,000 homeowners will be foreclosed upon. Now, we have to keep people in their homes, encourage these mortgage holders to pay monthly repayments to recapitalise the banking system whilst we sort out the entire system. What we also need is a national bank, like we've had in our country in the past in the form of the Commonwealth Bank, to create enormous amounts of cheap credit for large-scale projects to re-energise our physical economy. If we do that, then we can transform this crisis that we have now.